All right, hey there, everybody. Andrew King here, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician, and pleased to have you joining us for the latest in our series of free music industry webinars from NWC Webinars and Canadian Musician. This evening, talking about getting crafty on the drum kit with a very, very special guest who I'll introduce shortly. We've got Josh Trager, drummer for Sam Roberts Band, someone that I'm proud to call a friend. And yeah, we're going to nerd out on music, on drums, on SRB lore, and it's going to be great. So a few things to take you through before we get started. Yeah, really quickly, I'm going to launch, as we always do, a poll. And actually, I'm thinking this time we'll probably have quite the majority of drummers or of musicians, but anyone else in different capacities of the industry, if you'd be so kind to just quickly weigh in. This helps us not so much steer the discussion for tonight's topic, but in part it does that. And then we can also use this to tailor our future sessions. So take a second, vote there. You'll also notice you've got access to a number of handouts. What we've got here, the first one to tell you about is, it starts NWC webinar. That's actually a notepad style breakdown of the slideshow we're going to be following tonight. So if you are analog like me and want to take physical notes, feel free to take a second, print that off. You can jot things down as we go. Also up here, we've got our 2017 drum feature from Canadian Musician, published a couple of months ago with a great panel. Josh isn't on it, but I guess we're diversifying the great Canadian drummers we're showcasing. You can also get an ebook of some of our previous drum columns from the past recent year or two. And lastly, a vintage bit of Sam Roberts Band, Josh Trager, Canadian Musician, memorabilia, a column that Josh wrote back in 2009 explaining a really cool trick from the song Them Kids, which many would know, one of Sam's more successful singles. And we're going to talk about that one a bit later too. So you can grab those two handouts. Thank you, everyone that's weighed in on the poll. I'm going to go ahead and close this up. And yeah, last thing to tell you about musicbooksplus.com/webinars. Feel free to just save that. We'll share it with you again at the end. But we've got some discounts on a few drum-oriented book titles. There's also some tips there on how to make the most of your next webinar experience. So visit that when you have a moment. Again, musicbooksplus.com/webinars. And yeah, let's jump into it here. I'm just going to pull up our slideshow. All right. So yeah, as I said, Andrew King here, editor-in-chief, Canadian Musician, getting crafty on the drum kit with Josh Trager, drummer of Sam Roberts Band. He joined the group in 2005. We're going to talk a little bit about the quote-unquote origin story here. Shout out to the brands that Josh plays, including our friends at Yamaha Drums, Sabian Cymbals, Evans Drumheads, and Regal Tip Sticks. Here we go, the origin story. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. What's been keeping you busy, musically speaking, of late?
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Well, what's been keeping me busy? I've been practicing my butt off, actually, lately. Just kind of getting back into a lot of the things that I was super passionate about, you know, kind of coming up, you know, like... I feel like, you know, the deeper you get into an instrument, you know, after so many years of playing and experience and stuff, you kind of get like a little bit of a, you know, it's like if you go back and listen to the things you listened to when you were young, you get something new out of it. And that's goes for me. Like all my heroes that I like studied growing up, I've just gone back to them, and I feel like I have a deeper appreciation for everything they do. So I'm just trying to, I sort of apply that ideology, you know, the things these guys do, like, or my interpretation of it where I'm at now, and just try to like somehow get there and apply these things. I mean, one of the things actually is the teachings of Bruce Lee and the way that he has, you know, a lot of the philosophies and stuff, and how that applies to the drum set. A lot of my heroes have studied that those teachings. So I've actually started taking Jeet Kune Do, and you know, I'm trying to like look at the drums as an opponent. No, but you know, I mean, so I mean, yeah, just that, just trying to, you know, achieve that and trying to achieve the goals that I've always had set out for myself. You know, so practicing my ass off.
Well, you alluded to some of your drum heroes there, or I guess just general heroes of Bruce Lee. But yeah, I realized that I'm essentially by asking your drumming history and kind of asking your life story. But if we can keep it relatively Reader's Digest, yeah, give us a quick history of how you first found your way to the kit and just maybe a few of your experiences, influences, what drove you kind of leading up to 2005 when the opportunity with Sam came up that we'll talk about shortly.
Okay. Yeah, so I've, you know, super into music my whole life growing up as a kid and everything, and my parents were like very much on top of that. Violin lessons, piano lessons, you know, I showed interest in guitar, so they were always very supportive of that. So around 10, 11, I discovered drums. I became obsessed, and all it was literally one day hearing a Guns N' Roses song. It was "Don't Cry," and something about the drum fill just spoke to me, and I was hooked from that day on. And you know, growing up, I'd always like, aside from music, just any other interest I had, it was usually short-lived. Very passionate, but usually short-lived. So my parents just assumed drums was another little fad. So they didn't band and buy me a drum set just yet. It took like a year of showing my commitment, and you know, one too many pots with masking tape to make into a drum played with chopsticks. So they finally got me a drum set, and I was 11, and you know, I was, again, Guns N' Roses, so that was my thing for a while. And then as I went on, I started lessons, and I started to discover Modern Drummer magazine and all the great drummers out there, and I just ate it up. You know, I discovered like Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, Steve Gadd, Jeff Porcaro. I mean, you know, the list goes on, and Dennis Chambers, Gary Novak. So you know, I just tried to apply myself as much as I could. I had a great music program at my high school. The director of the music program was Danny Christensen, who actually went on to be the director of Humber Music. And not to mention having had a illustrious career as a session musician in LA and playing on the Sammy Davis Jr. TV show for years. So, I mean, under his tutelage and my various drum teachers, you know, they helped to steer me in the right direction. And from and you know, I went to music camps and just tried to get involved with whatever I could, jazz, you know, playing jazz and different stuff, rock bands with friends. And then I eventually went to Berklee College of Music, where a lot of my heroes went, namely Vinnie Colaiuta. And you know, when you're young, you try to like really try to follow in the footsteps of the guys you look up to. So I was thinking, well, he went there, I need to go there, and then I have to go play with Frank Zappa. I mean, who was, you know, already long dead at the time, but I was trying to like mimic these guys' careers. You know, like what was this guy doing at that age? You know. Anyway, so yeah, Berklee College of Music. I ended up spending a year there, and after that year, I got my first like professional gig, and that was with Frank Marino of Mahogany Rush fame, the 70s. Yeah, are you familiar with
Mahogany Rush by name for sure?
Okay, yeah. So he was basically, long story short, a 1970s guitar god. Who like had a cult following throughout the world, and Montreal based. So I ended up getting connected with him in 2001, and I basically didn't go back to school. I was supposed to do a 2-year program at Berkeley, and I just ended up, yeah. So you just posted this picture. So this is
There's the gang.
yeah. So through working with Frank and the reputation or the notoriety he had afforded these certain really incredible and unbelievable experiences at the time. I feel like it was premature. I was like really thrust into this like thing. I just came out of school, and I could play drums, and I had chops and stuff, but it wasn't harnessed by any means. And I learned a lot about. I was kind of kicked around, like I was like the kid coming in, and like really these guys showed me the way. So after a year of playing with Frank, he got invited to be a part of this tour with this picture is from. It was called Legends of Rock, and it was a tour of the UK put on by Uli John Roth, who was one of the original guitar players from the Scorpions. And I see the picture's gone now, but if it gets back up there, I can say who everyone is. But anyway, regardless, that tour also featured Jack Bruce from Cream, Glenn Hughes from Deep Purple, and I mentioned Uli John Roth, and also the original drummer from Jethro Tull, Clive Bunker. And yeah, I mean, so that photo is like at the end of one of the shows, like everyone sort of played with everyone. I mean, I got to jam with all these guys and stuff, and Clive Bunker was sort of the main drummer, but I did Frank's sets and got to play a little bit with the other guys. It was an incredible experience. Yeah, and then so I worked with Frank for about 4 years, and all the while, I think seeing as how I was picked up by Frank Marino in Montreal, and given his reputation, I started to get other gigs, in town. Like people wanted to check out the kid that was playing with Frank. So
Right.
So I gained a lot of experience, and worked with different people. I joined the band Two Spot Run for a minute. Great guys. Got to tour opening for Van Halen with an artist, a singer named Jonas from Montreal. He did he did a leg of the North American tour, so I got to be a part of that and play my hometown arena. I was still pretty young at this point, just like 20, early 20s, 22, 21, 22. And that pretty much led me. That was 2004, and that led me to 2005. That and various other things led me to 2005, where I started playing with Sam and the guys.
Bang on.
That
So yeah, tell us
the amount of time I ever took to tell that, like, quote unquote story, by the way. Yeah.
We appreciate it, I guess. Yeah, so how did that come to be in 05? Like, was there an audition process? What was your hookup? Yeah, well, I guess more specifically, what made you A, interested in the gig, and B, like, what was the process that you had to undergo to eventually get there?
Well, one thing that made me interested in the gig was that most of the musical situations I was a part of at the time, or up to that point, were with much older musicians, and I never, I didn't really have like a band that had any sort of longevity, if you want to call it that. Like when I was young, things came and went, and so I was kind of craving being in, having the opportunity to make music with more or less my peers, or guys that are young. I mean, not young, but I mean like around my age, and also what they were doing at the time was awesome, and especially given and they stood out to me given all the other stuff that was, I throw in much music at the time, and I thought they stuck out, and had great songs. And you know, I still remember like seeing the guys play on Toronto Rocks, and seeing the video for "Don't Walk Away, Eileen," and I was a fan. I was into it, and I had no idea where they came from. Unbeknownst to me, I was playing in a band on and off over the years with one of Sam and the guys' like close high school friends, which ended up being the connection to the guys. So yeah. So that anyway, that's what drew me to them at the time, and the connection was this guy Joseph Donovan, who like I said, I was playing in his band a few years prior, but you know, he was becoming a producer in his own right as well, so he was working on different projects all the time, and he would always bring me in, and we worked really well together. And when it came time that Sam and the guys started, you know, needing a guy, or it looked like they were going to need someone to step in, he was, you know, like furiously recommending me over a period of several months. And you know, it took quite a bit of time. It was a painstaking process, because it was like agonizing. You know, you want things to be immediate, especially these days. You want things to be immediate with, you know, information is so readily available. Back then, it's not that long ago, but still back then, and being young, you know, it's still like, man, like, when is this going to happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so, okay, so where am I here? getting off track. So the guy started working, like doing demos for what was going to be Chemical City, the second record. And around that time, their drummer Corey decided that he was going to step away. And so they had already started looking at a few different guys to come in, and they had made plans to go to Australia to record. And like our friend Joseph, who was, you know, highly recommending me, he just kind of like snuck me in there. He called me up one day and he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I have this little gig." And he said, "Okay, well, after your gig, you got to come to this bar. All the guys are going to be there." Like it wasn't like a planned meeting. It was just come and like put yourself in this place, in this room with the guys, and see if, you know, you guys can gel. So I ended up going out to this place. It was called Pistol. It's no longer there. It was owned by Sam's brother, actually. So I ended up meeting Sam, and I kind of knew the other guys in passing from just hanging around and stuff. Like, so I met Sam for like 2 minutes as he was leaving, and he was like going to Africa the next day, South Africa the next day on vacation before going to Australia. And at this point, the guys had already started working with, or like sort of auditioning and then working with another drummer. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it was I wasn't going to be going to Australia, that was for sure. So they ended up going to Australia with this guy, and they were there for like 3 months. I figured this is not happening. You know, I met them, I met Sam, and that's as far as it's gonna go. Anyway, they came back, and what was I guess it didn't work out with the drummer they brought there, and they recorded what was to be Chemical City, mm-hmm. but it wasn't necessarily finished. They had a few hurdles and things. The drummer wasn't. All the songs were being written there, and there wasn't a lot of time to prepare, and the drummer wasn't. So some of the performances weren't maybe up to snuff. I don't know, but anyway. So they came back, and then they were looking for someone else, and then finally they caved, I guess, and they're like, I guess we'll try this Josh kid, So that's how it happened. And they really left it to the 11th hour because they had gigs coming up for the summer, and so I spent like all these months like agonizing over this thing if it was going to happen or not. But I also, thought I would take the time to learn all the songs. So I learned everything like cold, and so then I got the call, and I went in and jammed with the guys, and I made sure I knew all the parts and everything, and they were basically stuck with me. Unless I was really terrible, they kind of had to keep me because there was literally a show like the following week. So, and that's the story.
You got to be good to be lucky, and you got to be lucky to be good, I think. So Chemical City.
I practice being lucky. I spent a lot of time on
that. So Chemical City, was right around the time that you entered the fold. So I guess we can then kind of look ahead to Love at the End of the World and subsequent records. But I guess if you can really briefly, we'll sink into the drums specifically in a minute. But typical Sam Roberts band song/album, if there is such a thing. What's the approach, the songwriting formula typically? Like, how does something go from an idea in somebody's head to potentially being on an album?
Typically, more often than not, and I would say 99% of the time, Sam writes the bare bones version of the song, lyrics, and music, and over the last whatever just like 13 years, it's obviously it changed. It's gone through different permeations, and like what we're actually presented with, like what the band is presented with, has changed slightly, but it ends up being a collaborative effort, but only after Sam spends some time on his own, sort of figuring out what it is he wants to say, and what he wants to write about, and what path he wants the music to take, and then it always takes a new shape, and can go in multiple different directions. I mean, we've had songs over the years that have had multiple versions. We've had songs that we've spent all this time working out all the kinks, recording it, and then shelving it and using like a remix version of the song. So it's kind of like anything goes, but the one sort of constant is Sam works on his own for a period before presenting us with the working product at the time. So I can give examples of specific songs, and especially for drum parts. I know you don't want to necessarily get into the drum part thing yet, but Sam actually plays every instrument magnificently. He's a fantastic musician, but he does not play drums. So most of the time, the drum portion of these like demos that we receive just usually have some sort of loop, which is sort of in the direction where he sees it going, and many times that's where my main input comes into play, and that's where sort of the songs end up taking shape, or maybe changing rhythmically, or thematically, or becoming, or going from a little bit more more rocky, or more laid back, and what have you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to open up the questions here. I forgot to mention at the outset, but yeah, after we chat about this last point here, we'll go to a preliminary question round. We've got a few in the queue. If you've got any questions for Josh about anything at all, type them in there. We'll get them. We'll field them. We'll get them answered. And then, but if we don't get to your question in this shorter round, don't worry about it, because at the end, we'll open it up. We can be a lot broader. And yeah, so we will get to it. Before we do questions, and then after questions, we're going to look at the drum parts. We're going to hear some audio. We're going to chat about what's going on in some of these tracks, where some of these ideas came from. Yeah, just really informally kind of nerd out. But until that, Josh, so you joined around the time of Chemical City, recorded a number of the tracks on that record, but a lot of Sam's favorites. I've got a few written here. We don't need to talk about each one individually, but just generally speaking, like for the back catalog stuff that you didn't play on or weren't involved with, what's your approach, like splitting that divide between being true to the original material, but also, well, A, being able to update it, I guess for the time, songs evolve over time, but also just to add your own personal flair to it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what it is. It is a marriage of, you know, whatever it is I bring to the table in my style, but also, you know, trying to honor and pay respect to the original recordings, and primarily in terms of the feel. I'm always very conscious of trying to maintain how a song feels and how it felt originally, because I mean that's sort of you know, to me that's like the most important thing. If it's got to feel right, and you know, some songs kind of, well, like, you know, over the years we've become a little bit more refined, even in the writing and the playing on all the songs. It's a little bit less bombastic and you know, like reckless abandon, you know, and like, not that we're like getting old and tired and decrepit, but it's not that at all. But it's more like sophisticated and more refined. So going back to some of the early catalog, and I was just talking about this recently with one of the guys in the band, I like find myself having a tough time sort of dividing my brain between the new and the old in terms of the approach. You know, like I used to play the shows for the first number of years just like losing my shit, you know, flipping my head around like crazy. I'd have Headbanger's Neck every day, and it was like just a full rock show. And a lot of the early catalog called for that, and obviously it still calls for that. It just doesn't come quite as naturally anymore. But you know what? And besides that, in terms of paying the songs, or you know, being respectful of those songs and those early recordings, it's an ongoing challenge to, you know, most people that play in bands or play with artists that have been a part of that band or project for years, for decades, you always hear about how they're sick and tired of playing the same songs. You know, they're sick and tired of playing like the old hits. But for me, I always look at it as a challenge that every time I get to play it, I get another shot at playing it that much better.
Huh.
You know, so that's like that's really important to me, and maybe more important to play the songs I wasn't a part of that much better.
Right. All right, on. Questions. We've got some good ones. I might as well start with the one that I think we all knew was coming. And
how to get Josh to shut up? Yeah. How do you get him to stop rambling?
Either give us one, or if it's too hard, a top three. But what is your favorite song to perform live?
where have all the good people gone is the first one that pops into my mind. And that's another song I wasn't a part of, but I just love that groove. I just love digging into that groove. And you know, I mean, I could get really nerdy and talk about like certain things and like how I've approached that song since day one, and but I won't. I'll spare you. But yeah, that song kind of it's really satisfying to play. It's got a little bit of everything. It's got like it's got intensity. It's got like real fat groove and pocket, or at least I try to make it have fat groove and pocket. And it's got a guitar solo, you know, that old chestnut, the guitar solo. Got dynamics, and it's got a fun. I mean, we don't do it all the time, but especially when we're in Canada, where you know we know that people know the songs, we'll always do like some audience participation and stuff. So it's like kind of so then it's kind of has a little bit of an arena rock vibe. So yeah.
This is cool because it's from a different person, almost the exact same wording with a different ending. What's your favorite song to play that isn't by Sam Roberts? Like if you're just in the jam space or at home with the headphones cranked.
Oh my God, that it changes often, but there are definitely staples that I've always been playing along to since I was a teenager, and like Sting, If I Ever Lose My Faith in You. Um, what else? Like some Tower of Power. Like What Is Hip? Soul Vaccination from Tower of Power. I'll always try to play along to like Jeff Porcaro stuff, like the Toto stuff, like you know Rosanna and Hold the Line and Georgie Porgy.
Love your yacht rock.
I've been trying. I've been trying to really like. There's this one jazz album. It's a live recording of Chick Corea, John Patitucci, and Vinnie Colaiuta. It's a lot live at the Blue Note Tokyo. It's sort of like a legendary in terms of like you know Vinnie Colaiuta freaks and jazz audiophiles. For fusion audiophiles, it's like kind of a legendary album, and I've been trying to play along to that. And I mean, it's the level is insanely high. So that's like kind of the ones that like I still struggle with after like how long, like 20 years of trying to play along with it and nail some of these wild things he's doing, and it's you know, and there's a few things like that, few records like that.
One more. There's a few good ones in the queue. We'll tuck them into the end because we got to listen to some music here. Geez, time is getting away from me. But last one is your favorite venue to play. And I don't know, maybe we can give one Canadian and one elsewhere.
That's a tough one. Oh, man. Oh, you know, I mean, like, I like I mean, obviously Massey Hall is fantastic. I like the pretty ones, the Orpheum in Vancouver. You know, the really like beautiful soft cedar theaters. The Jubilees. I know that you asked for one. The Jubilees in Calgary and Edmonton.
Edmonton, yeah, sisters.
I mean, we've also played at Mile One Stadium in St. John's, and the shows in Newfoundland are always amazing. So we've had some really fun ones at that venue. And in the States, oh my God. There's one in Washington D.C. called the Rock and Roll Hotel that is haunted, and it's my favorite because it scares the crap out of me. I had like the biggest ghost scare of my life at that venue last year. Like my hair was literally like I freaked out, ran to the bus, and all the guys were like, "What happened to you?" Because literally my hair was actually standing on end, and I was not okay. I was not okay. And I found out later that it actually the venue used to be a funeral home or like a mortuary, you know? Yeah.
Ooh.
And you can see under the stage, it's still like set up for that. It's where
Oh
they would
shit.
put the body.
Okay.
So it's like legit.
Okay. Well, here, let's roll. Let's hear some tunes. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming too throughout this. Yeah, there's all sorts of different things we can talk about for each of these, but we are starting listening to a little passage of With a Bullet from Chemical City, Josh's first record with the band. And here, let's give it a listen.
Great song. Sounds great.
So don't let go. Let waters flow. And babe, you have nothing to fear for. This is as real as rain. As deep as you move like moonshine.
So we started off in 6/4.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that actually that was something Sam did pretty often for a number of years. He was very fond of like songs in 3 and 6. There's a whole bunch of them.
So yeah, I guess where do we start here? First of all, maybe do you remember what kind of kit you were on? Like, was it your own? What studio were you in for Chemical City?
We were at a studio. I think that it was in Outremont in Montreal, and I think it was Pierre Marchand. It was I think a studio that he was involved with at the time, or not. But it was in Outremont. I remember that much. Mark Howard, who was the producer, the guys brought to Australia, who was he was like a pupil of Daniel Lanois.
Oh yeah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, so he came up to Montreal to continue work on the album, and we also brought in Joseph Donovan, the same guy that ended up getting me into the band to help out. And so I remember the kit, like I remember the experience in the studio recording this song pretty vividly. It was a Frankenstein kit. It was like, a Gretsch bass drum and a Yamaha tom and a Pearl floor tom. It was all over the place. Um, I mean, I wasn't really paying too much attention. I was just kind of whatever was there, whatever the producer wanted me to play. I was like, my head was in the clouds, man. Like I just joined this band. I was in the band for like a month, not even, and I was working on the album. We just played like massive shows, Live 8, and Canada at Parliament Hill. Like, so my head was in the clouds. I wasn't really paying attention to anything. I was just trying to like be on my best behavior and try to play the songs well. But with this one, the drum part actually was more or less just what you're hearing in the verses just throughout. It didn't have the changes. It didn't really have a little dynamic shift. Although I played him with dynamic shift, but the guy that mixed it ended up just putting samples over everything, so it's all the same dynamic, and that's okay. But it was, while I was just kind of trying to be on my best behavior, I still couldn't help but give some input into this song, and that was like I think that some of the first sort of stamp I had on any of the songs, and pretty much what it was there's the opening part, the drum part, because the song opens up with a drum part, and so what I suggested was flipping that drum part, that opening part for the chorus, so it would first off differentiate from the verse, give it a bit of a lift, and also kind of hit you from like left field because you're not expecting it to the rhythm to be flipped the way it is, and it's just
here, let's. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought it was free there. Let's hear a quick snippet of the intro here.
It's just like those two snare hits. You know, it's just that there's those two snare hits that I just basically I flipped the pattern so that, like, I literally just, it's a 2-bar pattern. I flipped the bars around because I thought that the vocal phrasing, where his words were landing, I thought it might be cool to kind of hit the accent with him. And I remember sitting in the control room and explaining that idea to Sam and Mark, the producer, and they're like, "Yeah, let's try it," and it stuck. And then fast forward to so actually before we fast forward, this wasn't to click. A lot of Chemical City wasn't to click. They weren't using click in Vancouver. Sorry, in Australia. And they wanted to keep a lot of what they had recorded. They wanted to keep, you know, the vibe that they got over there. So they didn't want to do certain songs from scratch. So I was playing over what had been previously recorded and what they were keeping. And this is, and now we'll fast forward to like a couple of months later when the album is finished and it's in the hands of the record company, and this is my first like proud moment after having joined the band. And basically what it was they had, like, the record company had heard previous version of the songs, and this song with the bullet was never going to be considered to be a single. And I also remember vividly getting a phone call from our manager, Dave Spencer, telling me that With the Bullet is now going to be a single. And and he was you know, it was like a testament to the drums, to the drum part. And that's actually, like, you know, I mean, let's talk about like a little pride for drummers. Like, we can make a difference, you know, like a drum part can make a difference. I mean, you know, guitar players and bass players and singers and the guys in my band would probably, like, you know, try to slap me down for saying that, but you know, I really feel that way, and I think it's true. Like, you know, it can really, like, change the spirit of a song.
Mm-hmm. And we will spiritually change the song. Fast forwarding, Love at the End of the World, Detroit 67. I'll tell you what, we're probably going to bleed a little past the hour here, which isn't a problem. But with that, we've got a few tunes to cover. Maybe I'll first open the floor, anything that you want to specifically mention, and then I'll ask you a different question for each one just to peer behind the curtain a little bit. But yeah, let's hear a little bit of Detroit 67 from Love at the End of the World.
Yeah. So I guess we should probably keep the clips short if we're running out of time. But
okay.
So that song, before we recorded it, we'd been doing some pre-production stuff, and we were in Chicago, I think, playing at Lollapalooza or something. And one night we went out to see we went out to a blues bar, and there was this band playing, and like all these old Chicago blues guys, and the drummer was sitting like with his back up against the wall and just playing really laid back, really behind the beat. And we were talking about how that would be like, that's how we should sort of approach Detroit 67. So now fast forward to whatever, a month later, we're in the studio recording this song, and that is the approach we took, and that is the, I think, only song we didn't use a click, and that's also the only song we've ever done 100% live off the floor, everything, even vocal. That's one take. I mean, what you're hearing is one take, but we did multiple takes, obviously, and that's the one we chose. The vocal performance, the musical performance, all the same. The only thing we overdubbed was like hand claps, and yeah. So I mean, a lot of people always talk about, oh, we did it live off the floor. Bands, or you go in the studio and they try to get the live off the floor, get the vibe, and all that stuff. Which when people say that, it just means that they're all playing at the same time and they're getting a drum take. That's how we do every other song. Everyone's playing at the same time, but more often than not, we're trying to get a drum take and then replace the other parts later. And another thing to mention with that song is, or at least another story about that song, is that it made us like the biggest band in Detroit for a minute. So that was kind of exciting, and it caught the attention of Kid Rock, who came out to shows. He used to come see us all the time when we were in town and in Detroit. And one time we ended up going back to his compound and like spending a whole day with him. And yeah, that photo is from we ended up going back to his place and having a jam session at from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m, and that's Chad Kroeger, also from Nickelback. Nickelback was playing in Detroit the same night, so we all convened over at Kid Rock's place and jammed, and it was really fun. And then we watched Old School the next day in his living room. And,
so that's Josh's hand with the American Badass.
That's my hand. Yeah, we were. I don't think we were really supposed to be like recording the whole thing or taking photos or whatever. But.
Well, that song, people talk about the pocket, Detroit 67, like that just feels like the pocket to me. That's crazy. So really quick one, you guys are live off the floor for that. Is that all in the same room, or was this where like you've got line of sight, everyone's playing at the same time, but any one of the elements is isolated?
Everyone's like Sam was in a vocal booth. Everyone else, we were all in the same room. I should say the other thing that we had to overdub only for sonic reason, like just be mic bleed and all that stuff, was the piano. So we recorded it with like electric keyboard, a Nord or whatever it was, and then overdubbed piano. But the performance is still there.
Yeah, and then I guess you just get a bit of more legit honky tonk to it. We've got this is one of my favorites, Them Kids, again, Love at the End of the World. In your handouts there, you get a PDF that we'll talk about, well, something I'm going to ask Josh about in a second here. But let's listen to a slightly shorter snippet of Them Kids and have a listen for the tambourine. I should have said earlier, too, I know because we're streaming here and trying to get this out to a lot of people, the audio quality obviously isn't where you'd like it to be when you're listening to such good music. So no better time to tell you, grab these records, or if you're a Spotify, Apple Music user, hopefully we're inspiring you to take a dive into Sam's catalog, because I've loved doing this over the last few days. But here's a little bit of Them Kids. So yeah, we can hear that constant tambourine all the way through, and I saw how the sausage was made, I'll admit. But yeah, that's the constant drive. Well, I don't know if we can call it the driver, but that's always there propelling the song forward. But then there's a lot of other tasty stuff going on. Tell us a bit about how this part came to be and the super secret tool that you use to pull it off.
Yeah, well, I use the super secret tool to pull it off live, at least. I mean, I could do it in studio, but I mean, for to be able to better isolate the sounds and control the levels, we did overdub the tambourine. But the beat kind of came out of what Sam's singing about, and trying to have a sort of a dancey element to it, and also
Right.
kind of like a little bit of, at that time, I think it was Neon Bible had just come out, and Arcade Fire was sort of referencing a little bit of like the sort of Springsteen dancier songs and those kinds of feels, and so that kind of upbeat, big fat drum sound and everything. And so anyway, I was actually reading the PDF earlier, and I forgot what I had written because it's been so long. It's like a dog's
It's been a
age.
few years, yeah.
So I suppose what I wrote is correct, and I wanted to make it like a sort of a dance loop. So that's why I put the tom hits in there. And so originally it was just supposed to be a straight train beat. And so since I wanted to put those offbeat tom hits in there, I had to reverse the what hand I was leading with. So ordinarily you'd lead with your right hand, and all the backbeats would fall on your right hand. So for this, and all the upbeats would fall on the left hand. So I reversed it so the left hand was hitting the backbeats, and the right hand was playing all the upbeats, which allowed me to move it over to the tom of my choice. And that's how that came together. And then it was around that time we were like touring a lot with the Stills, and the drummer at the time, Julien Blais, was had a hi-hat stand. I'd never seen anyone do this before, or really since. He had a second hi-hat stand with a tambourine on it, and he was using it for just like this type of thing, like constant 16th notes, pretty much just constant 16th notes. So I figured I would, borrow that idea and apply it, and I use it on this song, and I've used it on so many songs. It's my way of sort of approximating the percussion on all our songs, on all our records, and allowing the percussion elements of the songs to have some life live. And the tambourine is something that cuts through everything. So you're gonna hear it, and it's gonna help drive the songs and propel them.
From Tambo, we're going to cowbell. These two from Collider. I've always had a close relationship with Collider because that was actually one of my favorite Canadian musician cover stories to write, was surrounding this album cycle and learning how, like where you guys were recording it, what went into it. This one, but especially because of the percussion. I mean, you're playing, and then there's a ton of other percussive elements that work their way in here. You had Ben from Caliphone in the studio, if I recall correctly. But here, let's hear this snazzy little intro to Let It In. Before we jump into it, I guess I just have to ask, like, after hearing how when a song first comes from Sam into the band environment and how there's often that kind of scratch track of what he's after there, was that anywhere close to what you're doing here? Because this is super groovy.
nowhere at all near that in any way. I mean, when at that point, when we were starting to work on Collider, I knew Sam wanted the album to be, the theme of it to be very rhythmic and to draw from a lot of Afrobeat, and so I kind of ran with that idea, and I think there was a few things that there's a few things that I always try to bring to the table, and it's always a different version of sort of the same thing. It's like, how can I apply the cool Steve Gadd thing that I love to the music? How can I apply the cool like hip hop beat that I like really dug when I was a kid to the music? And how can I apply like Michael Jackson, anything that was ever on Thriller, on any song on Thriller, to the music? And in this case of Let It In, it was that cowbell thing, and it stems from, I couldn't even tell you a song per se, but it stems from like something in some sort of hip hop beat that I heard once, and it's more like it's a swung version of what I'm playing on Let It In. Let It In is like basically a straight version of the hip hop thing. I mean, hip hop is essentially built on a shuffle, halftime shuffle. So I just straightened out the shuffle. and whereas in Them Kids, the tambourine was overdubbed, the cowbell was played with the rest of the drum set on that recording.
Oh, I should tell people here then too. We wanted to share it with you here. The platform's not ideal. Our friends at Drumeo, though, a Canadian-based online percussion education site, they do amazing work, regular lessons. If you're not familiar, check out Drumeo. But Josh was one of their guest artists a couple of years back. You can find that lesson in its entirety on YouTube. It starts with the song we're about to play, but there's also some Let It In there. And basically, you hear the album track. You get to watch and hear Josh play live over top of it, in addition to some great interview content and other nugs. So yeah, definitely encourage you to check out that specific lesson and the cats at Drumeo too. But here, Last Crusade. I already said how much I love Collider, so I guess I don't need to say how great this one is. But there we were with a super groovy cowbell lick, and we're not far from that here.
More cowbell.
This is the last crusade we're on. This is the last crusade we're on. There's a lighthouse on a battered shore.
So
I'll let you go first. Yeah, but I've got a question for you after.
Okay, so the bass drum pattern that you're hearing there in that section is because it becomes 4 on the floor, and once it becomes 4 on the floor, it stays 4 on the floor for the rest of the song. But that bass drum pattern that's happening there at that point is the same pattern as that was, I think, the one thing that I retained from the loop that Sam had on the demo. So I basically took that, and all it was like shaker and that bass drum pattern. So I just expanded upon that, and then the main theme of the drum beat in the song in its entirety is the cowbell rhythm, which is Mozambique, and it's that's basically what's inspired by Steve Gadd. The beat he played and the cowbell pattern he played on Paul Simon's Late in the Evening, and where in Let It In, I take the inspiration and which was swung, and I straighten it. On this one, I take Late in the Evening, which is straight, and I swing it. Yeah, so that's basically it with that song.
Nice inversion. So I may be grasping at straws here. This just came to me when we were listening to that snippet. But I mean, yeah, we hear rhythm section, we think drum and bass, at least rock and roll. But in this one, I'm hearing like a really low wind. I don't know if that's a bass clarinet or something. But all this to ask, even if that wasn't tracked in tandem with whoever you had on horns and winds, does more of that, does that low frequency information, and it did sound fairly repetitive, like it was part of the rhythm. Does that inform, does that change up the approach? Is this song any different to you because of that, I guess is the way to put it?
Because of the low, like what the low end is doing?
Yeah, well, the additional like low frequency instruments in there.
Well, I could tell you this: when we were recording it, and after the, or when the horn player was in there tracking, and when he was basically done with this song, and he really like he tore this song a new asshole. He was incredible. His name's Stu Bogey, and he's been with Arcade Fire for ever since, like for the last eight years. And when he was doing his like sort of final take, and the end section was being pumped through the speakers in the control room, we were all like freaking out. Like, we were so like we freaking out with like elation. Like, I remember saying, this is like the heaviest thing we've ever done. So it's kind of it's funny you mentioned the low end. Or the low frequencies, because they were pummeling in a way that we've never had happen before on a song, or really since. So it stands out in that regard.
Oh, there we go. I was kind of onto something. Last one here, and because we're listening to a track from Terraform, we've got a copy of Terraform that we're going to give out. So in your question field here, was struggling. I was going to make it a bit more trivia about Sam Roberts' band, because we're talking drums here, and we want to move quickly. Fastest Finger, if anyone can tell me the drum company that endorses Josh and whose kits you can typically find him behind, send that to us. We'll get this in the mail for you afterwards. I guess I won't announce the winner, but I will see exactly. Oh, okay. Keep them coming, folks. Let's hear a little bit of
The house
inside, and a very, very tasty fill here. Okay, we've got some wrong answers. You can Google this. You can cheat. You can also, well, here, if we need to extend it, we will in a sec. But Josh's brand of drums, fill us in.
Well, a couple of companies are.
Everybody is mine. Don't look too far. The house is inside.
Yeah, so it's a little hard to hear exactly what's going on there in the drums, but like I mentioned before about always trying to take something from, like I mentioned, Steve Gadd and like Michael Jackson. I'm heavily influenced by the Thriller album my entire life. And one of the things that I love drum-wise on that record is "Want to Be Starting Something," because that drum beat is not propelled by like the conventional constant hi-hat or constant like ride. The main propulsion is like a very understated shaker, and the hi-hat plays the role of these like little accents, which is also something that as a rule, I like that idea of taking the instruments out of their convention. One example of that would be "My Life" by the Beatles, where the drum beat, there is no hi-hat. There's like one hi-hat hit as an accent. It works beautifully. So I was just trying to apply the same approach as that you hear in "Want to Be Starting Something" to the bridge of this song because it's such a lift, and I wanted the drums to come along for the ride. And I should say on this whole album, on Terraform, the whole album, Sam had a very clear idea about what he wanted to do, the kind of album he wanted to make, and that resulted in the least amount of pre-production time. And I you know, always come to the table with ideas, but I was, you know, curious to see where he wanted to go with things. So I wasn't like how I usually am, which is, you know, what about this? What about that? What about this? You know, I contributed ideas to songs that here and there that, you know, either got shot down or they got the green light. And in this case, in the House Inside, this was an example of something that got the green light, and it's probably one of my proudest moments on this record, on the whole album. And I think it's a pretty cool beat, and you know, it was a fun time in the studio recording this song. All the rest of the guys were like, "Ah, that's a super cool beat." And they were like, I want to sample that and use it on like my side project kind of thing, you know. So, and so again, the inspiration for that beat comes from Michael Jackson, which I guess I'm not the only one who thought that idea is cool about like the hi-hats doing his own accents, because I've been hearing that everywhere in popular music over the last few years.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
band,
that's interesting.
I am, you know, there's a few other bands, a few other artists.
Oh, badass. Jared, congratulations. Yamaha Canada. Shout out Ryan Hamilton. Jared, I will get your mailing address from you before we're wrapped up here. And then, yeah, we're also, with everyone that registered, going to randomly choose someone after this is said and done for a pair of Regal Tip sticks with Josh's SIG on them. So yeah, we'll go through that. Keep an eye on Canadian Musicians' Facebook page for the winner of that. We wanted to wait till the end so we had the full list of names. We're at the end. Questions, comments, concerns. We've got a few in line here. Send anything at us that you'd like. In the meantime, yeah, so this was a pretty long question. I'm going to try to boil it down. But as someone that sees a lot of live music, whether it's festival dates you guys are on or opening bands in different parts of the country, parts of the world, someone here is wondering if you can recall a time where an artist, like a band, was on stage and you were just totally blindsided, didn't know much about them, and were blown away. They've asked specifically about the drummer, but maybe there's an example along those lines, but then just someone whose music kind of totally took you aback when you heard it live.
While you're like delivering the question, I actually was thinking about like different elements of your question, maybe think of different bands and different experiences. But one that popped in there was at Austin City Limits Festival in 2006, I think. I was side stage watching Kings of Leon, and I didn't really know really anything about them, and that was a few years before they like really blew up in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being completely blown. Like they were, the thing that I remember was a song would start, and then the rest of, like, you know, some guys would come in, and then like when it really kicked in, it was like kicking in from another gear, on another like a bit from left field. It was just like, and that made it really exciting. It's like you kind of think the rhythm is, and where you think the one is, you're wrong. Or at least I was wrong, and it happened multiple times. And I was like, wow, these guys are really cool. They're doing something unique. And I mean, you know, like in Canada, like I remember like saying to people all the time, like a few years ago, if you asked me who are my two favorite bands in Canada, I would say like new bands. It was Arkells and Mother Mother, and the reason was they were both doing something. They had their own voice, And Arkells just slayed. They were a great band, very tight, good songs. Mother Mother, I thought they really had their own sound, and that's sort of all you need. That's like you know that's the meat and potatoes of it all. It's having your own voice, and they're an example of a band that does. In terms of like seeing someone whose drummer blew me away, I can't think of it. I mean, it happens like all the time, literally all the time. But um, I'm always checking out the drummer, and there's always something you can get from seeing other people play. Um, whatever the like quote unquote level of playing is, always something. There's always something to gain, and or like not necessarily to gain, but there's I'm often being inspired by everyone I see play. Like the guy that sets up on the street corner and plays. Like I was like, wow, this guy is fantastic. He's playing on the street corner and he sounds great. I mean, it happens all the time. I wish I could think of someone that that I've seen with the hand.
I don't know if it's connection or maybe if you can see it. You're sounding a bit muffled. I can still make you out, but it kind of swapped for that question.
I'm not sure where the mic...
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay. So I see. Okay, now I see where the mic is.
Oh, yeah, we're in business. No, you're all good. Yeah, let's go through here.
I'm still thinking about that last question.
Hey, keep going and blurt it out if something comes up. Yeah, this person says, mentions being endorsed, but outside of okay, wait, no, let me just put it more plainly. Dream piece of gear that you would love to get your hands on, maybe something vintage or super expensive. Like, is there any kind of holy grail of drumming that you've never gotten your hands on that you'd like to?
There's a couple of things. I mean, one, it's like I go on eBay and there's like my routine is there's like a few things, like 3 or 4 things. One of them is a Yamaha Rock Tour Custom in black, which was like a drum kit series that they had only for a few years, from the late 80s to the early 90s. And that was sort of the first drum set that I was like super into, because that's what Matt Sorum, who was in Guns N' Roses, was playing. So I had to have one of those. So, I mean, if I could get one of those, it'd be amazing. There's a discontinued Vinnie Colaiuta signature snare that Yamaha had for a short bit in the mid 90s. And also, it's all Yamaha stuff. It's the Maple Customs they had in the 90s, with the little gold lugs, in black preferably, or the like forest green or whatever it is. And also, I mean, I'd love to have a set of old Ks, vintage Ks, Zildjian cymbals, a Ludwig Black Beauty snare. I have lots of snares. I have lots of Ludwig snares. I don't have a Black Beauty, so that's on the hit list. And then I have one vintage kit. It's a 60s Ludwig psychedelic red. It's really, really cool, and it's 12, 13, 16, 22. I'd love to get a 14 and an 18. And that's, that would be more like a Holy Grail type of scenario, because those are really hard to find.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Some great questions, some that we won't get to, or actually that were covered earlier in the session too. So do check out a recording. One more to leave you with, and I'm wondering, maybe we're grasping at straws, but yeah, the question is, each one of Sam's records, kind of as we talked about when we were talking about the percussion on Collider, but has a really distinct kind of sonic aesthetic. And they use the example of Terraform being very kind of explorative with the synth elements, and and whatnot. So the question is, do you have any inkling? Do you know yet? Is there anything? Yeah, what's coming up next? And even if it's not been like concrete discussed, where Sam's going sonically, aesthetically, has anything you've heard given you a clue as to what might be coming up?
Well, it's going to sound like Sam Roberts' band, whatever it is.
In a good way, as they all do. And
Yeah.
I should have mentioned, like, each one has a very unique identity, but obviously something ties it all together, and that's you guys.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, there's no real solid direction as of yet. I've only heard a few bits and pieces, some instrumental demos. So it's your guess is as good as mine. But I mean, I can't wait to unfold the mystery.
Yeah, Terraform's 2016. Here we are, early 2018. So we're probably not too far off. I'm hoping not.
Yeah, the plan is to spend the better part of this year on that album, that as of yet unnamed album. But yeah, you mentioned the different themes, musical themes in each album, and I noticed we didn't discuss low fantasy. And actually, you know what, there's a couple things I wanted to mention about that in terms of like not necessarily song writing, but song construction and how a song can come together in certain situations when maybe you didn't spend a lot of time in pre-production or even have any idea of any preconceived notion of anything. And what I'm getting at here is something that we ended up doing on the recording, during the recording of Low Fantasy, and that was this sort of exercise that our producer, Youth, had us do. And Youth, I should say, is a very prolific and successful producer from the UK. Probably his best known work is the Verve Urban Hymns album, which had Bittersweet Symphony on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyway, one of the things he would have us do after a day of tracking, the way we worked with him was that we would do a song a day, completely tracked. We only had like 12 or 13 days to work with him, so that's how we had to do it. But the other thing, this other thing he brought to the table was, like I said, this exercise. And so what it would be at the end of the day, he would call us into the control room, and he would assign parts, chord progressions, drum loop ideas to us, and send us into the live room, and we would pick a tempo or whatever and just go for it, and he would speak to us while we were playing, and he would say, okay, now verse, now build, you're going to do a chorus, build into the chorus, now chorus, go. And the guys knew what chords they were going to play in the respective parts, and so he would guide us through and just sort of put an instrumental piece together, and he would then do, as he called, a chop, which was just an edit, and put something together. And so we went in to record our 10 or 11 songs, which we did, and then but we ended up coming out of that process with like 16 or 17 songs. And a few of those wild, those wild, like, basically exercises that we would do for like fun ended up becoming full songs that made the album. And some that ended up being like mainstays in our live show as well. And those two songs on Low Fantasy, it's Hands of Love and Golden Hour. And I mean, the cool thing about doing that for any band is you're going to end up with something that doesn't sound like you, and that's kind of a cool thing. Especially if you know, like us at that point, we'd been around for a while and we had an established sound and an established way of we had established our own way of our approach to
Right.
songwriting and song and recording and everything. So that was a really cool experience, and we came out of it with some great songs.
Oh, indeed. Yeah, you're right. We didn't hear any cuts from Low Fantasy, but another one for you to check out, get your hands on. Yeah, here we are. We've got a few drum titles that we highlighted, but the bottom line is if you use the code webinars at musicbooksplus.com, we'll get you 10% discount. If you go to musicbooksplus.com/webinars with an S, that's also where you'll be able to find these titles specifically and some tips to enjoy your next experience. And finally, yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Josh. Thank you a ton for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, man. And yeah, we're going to have a recording of the session up here shortly. With that, when we post it, we're also going to give a little bit of a treasure trove of some performance clips of some of the specific parts that we looked at today, as well as some of the We Were Born in a Flame tunes that we talked about, with Josh kind of adding his own flair to those. So yeah, we will have an email going out afterwards. This is where you get your hands on those materials. Thank you. I've said it already, but we appreciate you joining us. I'm going to shut down here. Last thing to tell you is nwcwebinars.com. We've got some drummers out tonight, but if any of you are pulling a Phil Collins and also singing, our friend Mika Barnes is going to be doing our next session on Thursday, March 22nd, talking about boosting your singing prowess and your singing career. So we're going to have some tips for vocal care, warm-ups, maintenance, improvement, and we're also going to talk about things like overcoming stage fright, delivering a killer showcase set, and things a little more focused on business side, or your career at least, and propelling that forward. Yeah, so that does us here. We're logging off. Hope to have you back. nwcwebinars.com. Sam Roberts Band. Josh, I'm going to lose you here, but thanks again, and look forward to chatting with you soon.
All right, take care, man.